Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of In the Spotlight. I'm real excited tonight because I've been a longtime fan of this gentleman. Who could forget him on Little House on the Prairie as Laura Ingalls Love, Armanzo Wilder. He was also Moondoggy in The New Gidget with a good friend of mine. Um, and now he also has a book coming out that he's going to tell us about. It's called Prairie Man, My Little House, Life and Beyond. It is my pleasure to introduce to you the one and only Mr. Dean Butler. And Dean, I want to thank you for coming on today. It's a real honor.
Well, look at that. There I am on your screen. There's my book cover. Awesome.
So, Dean, we're going to talk about the book, obviously, but I want to ask you this. I'm always curious. I ask a lot of my guests this. How did acting really begin for you?
Acting began for me as three lines in an eighth grade play where I forgot two of the lines in the performance. That's how it began. It was this very I was petrified to stand in front of people and recite because I was a kid who really didn't have much self-confidence about just being myself in front of people. And so I really struggled with that. It wasn't until a couple of years later, and this is like this is like childhood stuff, but it's sort of important in my evolution, and I think a lot of people have similar kinds of experiences. So, as a sophomore in high school, so a couple of years later, I am doing very badly in my geometry class, but my geometry teacher sees that that I need a bit of a break, to try and find myself. So he invites me to come and do the official scorebook at varsity basketball games at my high school in Piedmont, California. And before the game, and I'm really excited by this because we have a great team. Our varsity team was really strong that year. So doing the official scorebook for a winning team was really a cool idea for me. So I was there sitting at the table with Mr. Cochran, a guy with a slow Oklahoma drawl. And when the officials were ready to start the game, he looks over at me, he says, "So who's going to introduce the starting lineups?" Sitting in front of me is a silver Shure microphone, one of those old pedestal Shure microphones, gleaming at me. And in that moment, Mike, I have to tell you, it's like one of these wonderful moments that you see in some coming of age fantasy where the gym goes dark except for a pin spot that's coming down on the microphone sitting in front of me. It's like this transformative moment of something that's right in front of me that I could never have imagined that I would get the opportunity to do. And when I spoke into the microphone, I mean, of course, I said yes, terrified, heart pounding in my chest. But when I spoke into the microphone and called the guys' names, the audience applauded. The crowd in the gym applauded. And there was this huge connection for me of being heard and having people respond to that. It was a big, big moment in my life, a huge moment in my life. And when I went through that first varsity basketball season, we had this amazing record, and people, my peers responded to me in a really great way as I was doing this. This was like the first time in my life that my peers had approached me completely unsolicited to say, "You're doing a great job at the basketball games," things like that. I mean, we've all been kids looking for that space where we belong, where we stand out. And this was the first place in my life, the first moment in my life during these basketball games where I felt like I stood out and made a difference. And it started me down this path after the three, after forgetting two of the three lines 2 years later, to have people applauding my words in a basketball gymnasium for a winning basketball team was a thrill for me. So that's how it all started. Then a couple of years or a year or so after that, I followed a girl I had a crush on into the Piedmont High School Theater and took a chorus role in a production of Once Upon a Mattress, the musical that was made famous by Carol Burnett in the 1950s. And I absolutely loved being on the stage in front of people, feeling like I was being seen and heard. And that was a big deal, being seen and heard, Mike. And I'm sure you've got a story, something like that yourself, where you had this moment where everything changed. But really, for me, that was the moment when everything changed.
And it's really, cool about that story, because the thing is, I'm sure you had no desire to ever call a basketball game or to do the book for a basketball game. It just kind of happened by accident. And you're just at that game and you see how the crowd responds when making those announcements. And then the next thing you know, it just something that you never had any desire to do evolved as time went on.
Yeah, I went from nobody to the announcer at varsity basketball games. I mean, from no identity to the announcer of varsity basketball games. It was a big, big moment for me. And I just absolutely feel that everybody, if you're fortunate, has that moment where your future in some form or another is laid out in front of you in an instant, and you have a choice. You step through that door or put your mouth up to that microphone or whatever it is, or you don't. And I feel so fortunate and lucky and grateful that I did, because it changed the course of it. It really began the course of my life and what it's become.
Right. Now you talk about doing theater, Dean. You did some Broadway as well. Into the Woods. You played Tony on West Side Story. But the thing of it is, a lot of people I talk to will tell me, as much as they love acting, they love the stage more. Do you have a preference, or do you love them both equally?
Well, they're both, obviously, if working in front of a camera is acting, working on the stage is acting. So it's like, but I think the thing that's exciting about working on a stage is when the curtain goes up, the actors are in charge. It's up to the actors to get you from the beginning of the play or the show to the end. And if the actors don't come through, you're not going to get there. And that's not true with acting in front of a camera. The actors work in front of a camera, while it can be incredibly well compensated because so many people are going to see it. But the actor is really, although an essential, really truly essential part of what's happening there, actors are really the smallest part of what's happening. It's like an iceberg. The actors are like the ice that you see on the surface. Underneath is where the huge iceberg really is where all the work is happening, and where all the deep creative work is happening. It's where the movie or the television show is created. It's where it's captured and where it's finished. And that's a lot of wonderful work that a lot of talented people are doing. But the actor, as an actor, you really have no control over the outcome. I mean, you can do the best that you can do. And an editor and a producer are going to decide where you fit into that project. If you're the actor on the stage, when the lights come up, the curtain comes up, and you step on, you're on. And it's all on you at that point. And how that comes out on the other end is up to you and your colleagues on the stage, and of course the crew behind off in the wings, who has to move the scenery, and the guy who's running the lights, and all of that. I mean, it's a team effort, but the performance of the actor is in the actor's hands at that moment, and that's really exciting. I think I, I love the being in control aspect of it, and having, having an impact, a direct impact on the outcome. There's something really glamorous about working in front of a camera. I mean, people talk about it. It's been mythologized in our culture. I mean, the lights, the cameras, all of the people that are working back there, the wardrobe people and the makeup and the hairdressers and the cinematographer and the sound recordist, and all of these people who are there to make you look good, to help you succeed. But in the end, how you're going to come off in that film, I mean, yes, your performance is, but how that performance is cut together is in somebody else's hands. And that can be a blessing. I mean, sometimes, the right editor and producer can make you better than you were in the moment by the way they cut it, or they could really like not help you at all, and you're not very happy with with what's been done, and there's nothing you can do about it. So I guess to answer the long-winded answer, which is very common for me, Mike. I love the control of being on the stage. I love the magic of working on a set. I mean, I think I'm probably better on the stage than I am in front of the camera. If truth be told, I think I just occur better there. I've had friends that I really trust, and who will be honest with me, tell me that that's the case. I think I've had some nice moments in front of the camera, and I mean, when it comes to something like Little House, I'm so grateful for those things because those moments sort of immortalize you.
Yeah.
Little House is celebrating its 50th year. We are, the show has been there for all this time. The work was done, 4 decades ago, and it still lives on, and it is loved and appreciated. That you do not get on a stage. On a stage, when the performance is done, it's done. It totally lives in the memories of the audience that saw it, or not. But with film and television, what you did is captured, and if it really works, it can stick. And in people's consciousness, I'm so grateful Little House really sticks in people's consciousness. It's been a great, great thing.
Right. And Dean, the interesting thing about that high school basketball game, I was thinking about it now. I may be off a year, I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure while you were getting that big moment calling the game, Little House on the Prairie was on its first season. I think I want to say 74. You were a senior, maybe 73 in high school, but
74. I was, yes,
yeah,
74. I was actually starting my freshman year at University of the Pacific the week that Little House premiered on NBC. And the fun thing about that is the Little House pilot, parts of the Little House pilot were shot less than 10 miles from where I was going to college.
wow,
So there's this really sort of cool connection to all of this. I started announcing basketball games in, November of 1971.
okay,
So this was well before Little House was ever thought of. Little House came into existence as seriously as an idea in 1972-73. The pilot was shot in January of 1974, aired in March of 1974, and went on the air as a series in September of 1974.
right. So Dean, let me ask you, in between that time, I mean, before the big break with Little House came on, uh, what were some of the things you did? I always say this that a lot of actors people don't realize, but they start off in commercials first. They get their feet wet.
Mm-hmm.
They really get to bite their teeth in something small before they get to
Mm-hmm.
something big. So, did you do any commercials early on?
I did a lot of. So I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, and San Francisco is, as people who have seen it know, is a beautiful location. It's one of the most beautiful parts of our country. There's just something in the topography of San Francisco Bay and that surrounding area that's absolutely beautiful and a wonderful place to shoot. there were a lot of Coca-Cola commercials shot in that part of the country. There were a lot of car commercials shot. And I did my fair share of those. I think that my first speaking in a commercial was in a McDonald's commercial for a local, it was a regional campaign for when McDonald's was introducing their breakfast menu.
Right.
This goes back a long time ago. And they did a promotion called McBreakfast Bingo. And I was hired to be the McBreakfast Bingo guy who pitched this game to the public in the San Francisco regional area, in that Northern California regional area. And I got the job, I was told later, because I was one of the few actors that they had spoken to about this job who could actually read copy and read it to time. And I was in my freshman year or my sophomore year at University of the Pacific at that time, and I was spending a lot of time at Pacific's NPR affiliate KUOP in the studio, doing newscasts, sportscasts, listening a lot to the great NPR voices of that day, Bob Edwards and Susan Stanberg, and those voices that were just legendary at NPR during those years. And so learning something about that process of delivering copy to time and making it understandable. And so my mass media professor, Dave Streeter, was very gratified to know that I had gotten this job because he had done his job well, teaching me about reading copy. So, that was really fun. So there were those kinds of commercials. I did a wonderful spot for Mervyn's about a product called Dura Jeans at the time, where I was a salesman in a Mervyn store with a little boy that comes up, and I think a little boy and his mother that are coming to buy him some kid jeans, and they had this product called Dura Jeans, and I was the voice of that product. And that's really more than the McDonald's commercial. I really got recognized from the Mervyn spot because it was airing constantly. And as I got my first, I did my first television dialogue, like series dialogue on the streets of San Francisco, where I was playing a young prank phone caller and caught on the street by Carl Malden and Richard Hatch, who had taken over for Michael Douglas in that last season of the show. And so I got to do that. The coolest thing about that, Mike, and actors who have done this will understand, but the coolest thing about that was seeing when the honey wagon, which is the rolling dressing rooms, went by. The second AD had written my name on the dressing room door. And so I'm standing there getting ready to take the call to report for work. And as all the streets unit drives in, I'm seeing my name on the dressing room door. That was a huge moment for me to see that. It's like, Carl Malden's got his name on a door. Richard Hatch has got his name on a door. My name's on a door. I thought, that's really cool. I felt like I am in the semblance, in the beginnings of arriving here in this situation. So, those early things were fun. I got my first really huge break also in San Francisco doing a movie of the week for CBS called Forever, which was based on the Judy Blume novel Forever. I did that opposite Stephanie Zimbalist. I was the only person cast in the movie that was local in San Francisco. Everyone else came from Los Angeles. But John Cordy, who was the director, and John had won Emmys for the autobiography of Miss Jane Pittman, and had gotten a lot of plaudits for Farewell to Manzanar, something about all of the Japanese internment camps that had been placed in California during the early days of the Second World War. And he'd done a wonderful Academy Award winning documentary called Who Are the DeBolts and How Did They Get 19 Kids? Now, I went to high school with the DeBolts because they lived in Piedmont. So the 19 kids were right there in my hometown community. I didn't have any connection to John Cordy. I didn't get that, but I certainly knew who the DeBolts were. Getting that was what took me to Los Angeles. So suddenly, and the cool thing about that, I mean, the whole thing was cool, Mike. It was amazing. But sitting at home on that night in January when Forever aired on CBS to hear the announcer say, "We'll be back with Forever starring Stephanie Zimbalist and Dean Butler after this." This was on the CBS television network. That was like the gold standard of broadcast networks. I mean, these are, these are, it was just the coolest thing. I mean, I feel like every stage of it had some little moment that occurred that made it really special. I mean, obviously working with Stephanie was great. It was a wonderful cast of people. John Cordy was a wonderful, wonderful director. It was a very, it was a cool little movie. I mean, it featured music by Fleetwood Mac and Johnny Rivers and Jennifer Warnes did the soundtrack for it. It was really, really fun to be a part of that. And it was this wonderful coming of age story, coming of age love story, which I felt very, very prepared to take on because I had had this wonderful coming of age romance with a girl I fell in love with in high school. And I just felt like I was totally organically prepared to do that and be exactly what they needed me to be. And the casting director, a woman named Mary Goldberg, who went on to cast Aliens and a lot of other wonderful movies. Amadeus, she cast Amadeus. When she met me and we read the first time, she said, "For you to get this would be 1,000,000 to 1 shot, but you're perfect for this." And she really fought for me. And I think John Cordy really fought for me too once he met me. And it was great. I mean, so yeah, you ask a question, you get my whole life story.
But those are the stories that I think a lot of people love hearing, because I think sometimes people just think it's easy to get into this business, and it's really not. And sometimes you just are perfect for a part, and even though you may go in as the underdog, you come out as the main person because you just are perfect for that. And
Right.
think about this. Gonna get to Little House on the Prairie right now because number one, tell us how you got the audition. But number two, think about this, Dean. You are coming in to not just play a minor character. You're playing a character who is now whose character is gonna marry the main character of that show, because in a lot of ways, Laura Ingalls was the main character.
Oh, of course.
Of that
it was
show.
her story. It was her story.
It was her story. So,
absolutely.
I mean, that's a lot of pressure because you're coming into a series that has had a 5-year run. It's very successful. And I'm sure there's got to be a little intimidation when you first got there. So,
of course. Yeah, no, of course. I mean, I think the fact that everybody, that everybody involved in the show was very confident in how good the show was, and they were confident in their work. Michael Landon was a supremely confident star, executive producer, writer, and director. I mean, he wore the 4 hats of a production as capably as anybody I've ever been around anywhere in our business. He was exceptionally good at this. So, there's part of it is, some of the pressure comes off when you think, well, if Michael Landon thought I was strong enough to be a part of this, then I must be okay. But there's always that unknown where, I did okay in the audition, but am I going to go and fold, when the camera's rolling on me? And you just don't know what you're going to do. I mean, I didn't think I would do that, but you don't know if you're going to be okay. And, I made a big mistake on the first day, in the first hour. I went up to Michael Landon after my first scene and I asked him, was I okay? And he looked at me pretty coldly and he said, how would I know? I've only been doing this for 20 effing years.
Yeah.
And it was a cold slap in the face in that moment. This was a moment of total vulnerability for me. I didn't know what I had, what it was going to be, and he really it was like being sucker punched. I just felt like I got crushed in that moment. But on the flip side of that, once I sort of pulled myself up off the ground after feeling like I had been annihilated by this guy, I realized that he was telling me, you got to trust me. If I say cut print, it's good. You don't have to question that. If I need another one, I'll do another one. But if I say cut print, it's good.
Yeah.
And that's how he communicated that to me. Now, several days later, he came up to me, maybe sensing that I had been wiped out in that first day. I mean, I was thinking, he's going to fire me right here. I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, I asked this question and he wasn't happy with the question. But he came up to me a few days later in a quiet moment between takes and he said, I'll never let you look bad. You can trust that. I will never let you look bad. I will always take care of you. And I mean, he took care of everybody, in our company. I mean, everybody was safe with Michael. But in that first moment, I didn't really know that. And his reaction to to me, what was an innocent question was really a shock to me in that moment. I do write about that moment in the book, and it was, I do worry. I worried about that moment in sharing it because Michael is so beloved by so many people, and there's the sense that Michael was an infallible, perfect human being. And so to bring this up, that maybe suggests that, well, maybe he was perfect, maybe he wasn't in that moment, but I didn't feel warmly protected and safe in that moment. It was a moment, but he was sort of toughening me up pretty quickly. Just said, trust me and do your work. And that became the focus of what I was doing. But I have to tell you, Mike, in all candor, I never forgot that first moment with him. And that stayed with me and has stayed with me forever, as long as the experience went on, because it was so jarring to me. Now you can say, oh, well, you got to get tough, but fine. But it was a big moment when you feel like everything you said, this is this hugely successful series, I'm the new guy in town, am I going to be okay here? All I needed to hear was, yeah, it was fine. Let's keep going. Next scene, and that's all I needed to hear. But he went another way, and it definitely got my attention.
Yeah, but the thing is too, though, Dean. Anything you do in life, there's what you call growing pains, and not that this was a
Yeah.
growing pain,
Well,
but
it was, but I
the
agree with
fact
you.
that the fact of the matter is that it didn't break you, and it was just a first day of work where it was a little tough. It wasn't everything you expected. It was almost like you know you're not with mom and dad anymore. You have to grow up and stuff like that. So I mean, in a lot of ways, it was probably a positive, even though you didn't realize it at the time. But it really was, because what it taught you was, hey, not everybody's going to be nice to me in this business. And not that he was mean to you, but he
Right.
didn't give you the, you know, praise, or gave you the
Well, Mike.
satisfaction that things were going well. But let me ask you this, Dean. I got
Mike,
to
let
tell
me
you,
just say to you before you ask your next question.
yeah,
That's a very thoughtful response to that story. You know, good for you. I mean, I think I think what you've just said is right, and it it takes time to process that, and like as you said, you don't fold, or you could fold, but it's not in your best interest to fold. No, thank you for that. That was really good. That was very insightful, Mike.
well,
So next question.
well, thank you for that. But I'll tell you this. I think Little House on the Prairie. One of the things that for me as a viewer watching that show, and sometimes it's hard for me to watch reruns, and I'll tell you why. It's a great show, and I loved it. But
Yeah,
you know that every episode there's some sad scenes in it. There's some tough
yeah,
parts. It
yeah.
really is. And one of the episodes, again, I know a lot of people put in weight for our Manzo and Laura to kiss. And I know that was like the big thing. When are they going to kiss? But the thing that really stood out to me was an episode you did. It was a Christmas episode. And our Manzo's talking about his older brother, how his older brother's telling him there's no such thing as Santa Claus and stuff like
Yes,
that. And you're
yes.
telling the story. And then you talk about how your brother, for not believing in Santa Claus, he didn't get any toys for Christmas.
Right,
And,
right.
it was just like, to me, it was so great for children who are watching that episode because you always want children to, really embrace Christmas and what it's about and stuff like that. And I thought that taught a great lesson in that episode. And I just thought that was one of your character's best episodes ever.
That's cool. I enjoyed that episode too. It was nice to be able to tell that story. Something that's a little piece of trivia on that. I loved the young actor they hired to be Almanzo as a little boy, as a
Yeah.
small boy. One of the cool little pieces of trivia on that I noticed as we were shooting is that, especially he had this great, little haircut, that sort of moppet haircut, but he had brown eyes, I had blue eyes. And, you know, but that didn't alter the fact that he was, wonderful, sweet kid. And so you could sort of look past the brown eyes as opposed to the blue eyes, but that was something about him that I always remember. Other than the fact that he was really terrific, just the different eye color. That was a fun little piece of trivia. Sometimes, casting directors will, you look past those kinds of specifics to what someone who's going to be the best overall performer, and they got it with him. He was wonderful.
Right, he definitely was. And let me ask you, I mean, you have to have good chemistry with the people you work with, and you worked well with everybody on that show. But obviously, it was important for you and Melissa to have good chemistry. And when I looked at you and Melissa, I really looked like I was seeing a husband and wife. There were going to be days where things were great, but like one thing about the Ingalls family, they dealt with a lot of tragedy in their life. So, I mean, I think it made Laura stronger, obviously, because she had dealt with so much. But one thing about it is it always felt like Armanzo was like the perfect best friend for her as well, because he wasn't always going to tell her what she wanted to hear. And at the same time, he was going to be supportive all the time. And I just really loved the chemistry between you and Melissa. So talk about working with Melissa, because you two did a tremendous job together.
Well, that's Mike. That's very nice. I think Melissa and I did not have an easy time working together. I think a lot has been said in Laura world about the age difference between us. And at that time, when we started working together, Melissa was 15 and I was 23. That 8 years at that age, that's a big deal. You
Yeah.
know, you have, that's a chasm difference in life experience and physical maturity and all of that. And Melissa was a very young 15-year-old. She was very bright. She was a great communicator. She was confident. She had all of that. But Melissa had never been on a date. She didn't. she had no, other than the boys that she was working with on the set, and there were a lot of great kids on the set that she was working with. But none of those situations called for her to be in a romantic situation, and she just had no context for that in her life, other than, as all audience members do. You see these scenes, you're watching stuff, it's there. You see your parents, you see, that there's that. But until you've done that yourself, until you've kissed, until you've held somebody, until you've experience some of that intimacy yourself, it's pretty daunting. I mean, I think we all remember our first kiss. Maybe it was a good experience, maybe it wasn't, but we all remember it, and because it's this crossing of a line. So, I think Melissa was rightly anxious about all of this. And keep in mind, I was probably a foot taller than she was, probably outweighed her by 80 pounds. I mean, we were just big difference between us physically and age-wise. Now, that said, and I've always felt this way, Melissa was very brave in her willingness to push through what was her relative lack of experience, life experience. She was able to just make that happen. It wasn't easy for her. I mean, I know there were days when it was challenging for her because she felt like she was being pushed into something that she hadn't had a chance to experience on her own yet. And those kinds of things you want to experience on your own before you're going to have to show them to the world. So, I think she was pretty strong. I think a lot of young actresses might have folded under that pressure, but there was no fold in Melissa. She was very daring, and we also had to be because of the age difference and because of the size difference. This was never going to be a hot and heavy romance for television. We weren't doing Dallas. We weren't doing any of that. It was a very chaste, pure, sweet, which is why it was so loved too. It was this very innocent, sweet thing. So it was going to be handled very carefully, and it was essential that we did handle it carefully, because I think if the audience as a whole had ever gotten the sense that Melissa was outmatched or overwhelmed physically or emotionally by this relationship, I think there would have been real problems for us to deal with as a show. As it was, I think Michael handled all that really well, and I think in hiring, me as he did, I think he recognized that I was someone who was going to be respectful of her. I grew up in a very matriarchal family. I grew up with enormous respect for women. All the women in my life as a young boy growing up, moms, grandmothers, aunts, all these were women that were to be respected, and I did respect them. And I had my mother sitting down with me telling me the things I needed to know in the world at a very young age, so I had a lot of respect for all that. So I think that really helped. By the time we did the first kiss, Mike, I think I was playing it younger than she was at that point, to just make it so that I was the young man beguiled by the unexpected feelings he had for this girl. But when I met Melissa at the beginning of that season 6, there was no hint of a woman there at all. I mean, she was a girl with the pigtails and the smock dress and all of that. And I'm thinking, wow, how are we going to get to where, and I don't know what the timing of all this is. I didn't know it was all going to happen in the first season. I just did, in that season 6, but that was Michael's plan. And we got there, but it was surprising how fast it moved once it took on this momentum, once it was clear that he was pushing towards the end of that season and he was going to tell those stories. It was a lot for us to deal with, but it was but audiences seem to love it and appreciate it. And the fact that audiences still love it 45 years later, from when it all started, is just, it's a wonderful affirmation that we did okay, that we succeeded and we made people feel good in the process. And that's a great feeling.
Yeah, and Dean, your character was very popular. I mean, like I said, I mean, I think viewers, they were going to be tough on you if you weren't the right person for uh, Melissa's
Right.
character, because everybody
Right.
loved Melissa's character.
Right.
But I mean, right away, the reaction was so positive, and you could just see that, like, Armanzo, his character, he was the type of guy that fathers wanted for their daughters. I mean, he really was, because there wasn't a mean bone in his body, and you played it to such perfection. But let me ask you this: I touched on this a few minutes ago. How hard at times? I know you're an actor, but when you're playing scenes where it's very sad at times, and you're going through some tough, you know, tribulations and stuff like that. How hard is it for you as you're doing that scene? Because I think, you're not just acting sometimes. You get so into it and you're trying to do it so well that there is a lot of emotion that comes out of you.
Well, now we're talking about acting and craft, and I came into this very, very green, and and I got a lot of confidence from watching the people around me work. I think there were probably moments when I pushed it a little bit too much. What I came to realize over time is that the simpler the reaction was, the more effective it was going to be on camera. I mean, you don't want to get too histrionic with the reactions. I mean, I didn't, because I wasn't going to be in control of those things. The way, say, for example, we all watched Michael Landon cry a million times on Little House, and he just owned that. He knew that was part of his craft. He knew how to do that. Michael knew the emotional trigger that he was going to use to get the tears. I mean, and they always came. He had that. That was part of his bag of tricks that he had available to him. I didn't have any of those. I didn't have any of those kinds of tricks. But something that's sort of interesting about this whole process is you realize that you're not in these moments alone. And I think that the big ally, the big emotional ally that all of us had, was our composer, David Rose, who wrote beautiful, beautiful melodies and really beautiful, evocative cues that told the audience not only what we were feeling, but what they should feel too. And I mean, and that's the power of screen music. Is screen music, when it's good, when it's appropriate, when it fits, just grabs you and puts you right in the spot where you need to be emotionally to have the best communication, the best communication of an idea. I think David was masterful at it. He was a very sensitive, empathetic man. He saw the world in music. He was able to capture emotional life in notes, in composition, that were so powerful. And you could wonder, well, if you took the music away from some of these amazing scenes where people cried their eyes out, I don't know if there'd be the same reaction. Maybe there would be, but I think David's the one who really primally took us there, because music takes us places instantly. There's something that works in our sensory, our emotional system, and we hear certain combinations of notes, and it touches us in a very particular way. And I think David understood that really well. So you didn't have to do a ton of acting to have a great moment happen, because David could give you a lot of emotional life, whether you genuinely had that going on or not. I mean, this is the thing. Film is a team effort. There are a lot of people involved in making those moments beautiful. The cinematographer who makes the scene look the atmospherics of the light, and the cameraman who moves the camera in the particular way, and the push at the right moment to communicate the emotion. David Rose with the beautiful violins, the writer who creates the dialogue, and then of course the actor who is sitting in the middle of that, who is charged with delivering that moment. And if everybody does their job, it can be, and does their job well and in sync with each other, the outcome can be really, really wonderful. And Little House had a lot of those kind of wonderful moments
Right.
that where it all just worked because everyone was in the right spot.
Right. And speaking of which, Dean, this is a book. I can't wait to read it. I think it comes out like around June 25th, if I'm not mistaken. Um, so let me ask you this. It's kind of neat that it's going to come out right, you know, a few months before the 50th anniversary. But
Right.
in the 50th anniversary of the show, that book comes out. I think it's perfect. What inspired you to write the book? And let me ask you, how I've always wanted to know this when I talk to different actors. From being on camera, how difficult is it to be a writer, especially writing a book? Because it's not easy to write a book. It takes a
No,
lot
it's
of,
not.
yeah,
No, it's not. I agree with you, Mike. It's not easy to do. I think it's really it's daunting to sit down and think of, or to just consider, you know, putting that many words on, into a typing that many words and making them reasonable to read and entertaining to read. I mean, as a first timer, I'm grateful that I had a really strong outline to work with, and it was the outline that was sent to Kensington Publishers, and they, when they read the outline, they said, "Yeah, we'd like to see that book. We'll buy this book." And then it was a matter, I knew that I needed to discipline myself. So my plan was to get up every morning at 5 a.m., 7 days a week, and go into our dining room and sit down at our dining room table where my computer, my MacBook Pro was sitting, and just move through this outline in an orderly way. Now, some days I wrote 500 words, some days I wrote 1,000 words, some days I wrote 1,500 or 2,000 words, depending on how it was all flowing out. But I did make myself get up at 5 o'clock every morning. The coffee was ready to go, turn it on. Catherine's still asleep. Our dog Benny is still asleep on the bed. So it's dark outside. There's no disturbance at that point. So before there's noise in the house, I've got an hour and a half basically before things start to stir. And I can go a little bit longer than that, but really once things start to happen in the house, it's just like it's over. I had to stop. So between January 9th, 2023 and July 31st of 2023, I crafted the first draft of the book, and I had an editor following along behind me who was making suggestions every step of the way, and tightening and adjusting things and reorganizing things in a way that made sense. And so it was a process, and and literally I would get up when I launched the book. It was a Word document. I launched the book, and I wanted to look and see how many words I had as I started the day and how many words I had when I was done that day. And I think when I turned in the first draft, or when I look at my first unedited draft, it was 210,000 words, something like that.
wow,
The final book is 93,000 words, thereabouts. So there was a lot that was shuffled around. But that process, as someone who has done some producing and sitting in an editing room and you're making decisions about the pictures in front of you and cutting to get to the stuff that really works. The idea of losing a third of it, not quite a third of it, but, or two-thirds, not quite two-thirds of it rather, was not an uncommon, that was not daunting to me. That didn't flip me out. Because I felt like as I was reading, as it was revising, it was getting better and clearer and sharper. So that process really worked for me. And I really wanted an editor following me because I didn't want to be concerned about writing it and editing it myself. I just wanted to spill what was in me out into the document, do it the best I could, not revise it too much as I was going, although I did, certainly, because you want to make changes. But then I really left it to my editor to sharpen it. And obviously I had to agree with everything. If I pushed back on something, we were going to change it. But for the most part, I was very trusting of how the editor helped me sharpen the message in the book. And so I'm grateful that I had that, because I don't know that I would have been able to resist. I'd probably still be revising the first draft now if I were writing it on my own, completely by myself, because it just would have flipped me out to think about turning it in and not having had someone else's eyes on it.
Right.
And I really think I'm a huge believer in collaboration. I do not think that people work best when they're working totally by themselves. I think if they're the right collaborators, we need people who can help us sharpen the message and help us and we have to trust them. If you don't trust them, then it's really a problem. But if you trust the people who you're working with in anything, when you're writing a script, writing a book, cutting a movie, if you trust your collaborators, you're going to do better in the long run. If you don't trust your collaborators, then you've got the wrong collaborators. And, we need to work with people who we believe in. And I feel fortunate that I had people working alongside me on this that I believed in or that I do believe in. And that was a big help.
Right. And I know you don't want to give too much away because, I wouldn't want to know a lot of it because I want to read it and be surprised. But what are just a couple of things that we could look forward to as we read this book?
Well, I think there are probably, a few things that are important. I mean, I feel like one of the things that I will say that I do say in the book is that I feel like I was in many ways born to be this guy, to play this person. And my life, obviously 100 years apart, mirrored a lot of things in his life. And that was helpful to me. So that's one thing. I learned about family and love and acceptance from my multi-generational family that I grew up within. That was an important part. I learned about love and romance from a girl I fell in love with in high school, and I write extensively about her in this book. She was a huge influence in my life. And she is the one who I think really affirmed what I was growing up to be and supported that. And I felt very strongly about that. I had challenging, you're going to find out in the book that I had challenging relationships. I've had challenging relationships with male authority figures my whole life, beginning with my father, with Michael Landon. There were challenges in that relationship. challenges with acting teachers, challenges with my director on Broadway. There were challenges with that, and I don't. Who knows why we have these challenges? I mean, I have my theory about it, and I think I explain that in the book. And that's just, relationships with women have always been easier for me than relationships with men. And I can't explain it, don't know why, but I mean, it has something to do with the way I was raised and the interactions with my father. So you're going to see that. And then you'll read about that in the book. And then I think you're going to read a lot about Little House and why, in my opinion, and this is only my opinion, why it worked. And we have, there have been a number of books that have been written about the series by people who are in a good position to know about this. But I've offered my opinion about why the series works. I've offered stories about how the series came into being, how it was that origin story that allowed it to come into existence. And I've offered my take on that after 40 years of watching that story and coming to understand that story. And then I think the overarching thing I hope that people get from the book is an enormous sense of gratitude for this life that I could never have predicted as a little boy. I mean, Little House. I mean, I've done a lot of different things, and working as a producer and working as an actor and so on. I've done a lot of different things, but Little House is the thing that sticks in a really big way, because 50 years after it premiered, people are still watching it, still loving it, still appreciating the lessons that it teaches, the stories that it tells. And the glow of love and appreciation that flows to all of us who are a part of it because of that is the most extraordinary gift I've received in my life from anywhere. And that is, I mean, other than my own immediate family, who has been so essential to making me who I am, and my beautiful wife Catherine, who has been so essential to me being who I am. But those years with Little House and that global love affair that people have with this material has just been massive to me. And there's my beautiful girl right there on your screen. Yeah. I've had a very blessed life, Mike. I mean,
Yeah.
I've had disappointments, no question. We've all had disappointments. I've made mistakes, big mistakes. But the overall, I'm so fortunate. It's been really good.
Right. I think this book is going to be awesome. I cannot wait to read it. And I know so many people are going to enjoy it, Little House on the Prairie fans everywhere. But two things I wanted to bring up, and I couldn't end the interview without talking about these as well. And you just brought your wife up. And I got to tell you, I remember first seeing her in the final episode of Dallas. She was in the final episode. She played
Yes.
Ray.
Was it Ray Krebs?
Krebs. Ray Krebs.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
She played his wife in the J.R. Ewan dream sequence because it was
Wow.
pretty much a dream episode. But then
Yeah.
I'll tell you, the 9-year run she had on 90210 as Felice Martin. I mean, she played that
No.
to perfection. And I think
Yes.
I think that's why, like,
Yeah.
when I look at you two are so similar because you both had very underrated careers that you have like a piece of history, both of you, that'll last forever. She will always have 90210. She will always be Donna Martin's mother, and that was an
Yeah.
important character. And you will
Yeah.
always be, your character will always be Laura
Yeah.
Ingalls' husband. So
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
it's fitting and it's really cool that you both have been successful because both of you are tremendous actors who deserve to be recognized. So I didn't want to end this interview without talking about her briefly, you know.
No, thank you for that, Mike. I appreciate that. I think Catherine is a wonderful talent. She's she's the best coach I've ever worked with. When I've
Yeah.
prepared stage performances and so on, no one watches as intuitively as she does, and and helps in such a great way as Catherine does. I think something else that's been really good for us in our marriage, and we've been married for 23 years now. I mean, I met her on the set of Little House when she was coming to read for Michael for Father Murphy.
Right.
She had just finished reading for him, and I met her on the outside of the trailer. I think she was going into the makeup trailer or something after that reading. And I just saw her from a distance, and we saw each other, and we looked at each other and waved. We didn't get together for another 15 years after that, but I knew who she was, and I had just come out of a marriage that was a first marriage that was not a good experience for me, and she was out of a marriage that had ended a few years earlier, and so we were sort of ready for something else at the same time. And I think one of the things that's been so good for us is we are, unlike so many actor couples, we have never been competitive with each other. Competitive for parts, competitive about who's making more money, competitive about whatever it is that you can be. And actors can find all kinds of things to be competitive about. But she has been so steady in our lives together. I mean, and I think I've provided some steadiness for her as well, Mike. But and I know I have. But her stability and her belief in the long-term picture. Once we stepped into the marriage, and after my first experience, it took me a few years to be willing to say I do again. But it's really funny. Once I said, I remember that day, we were at the Bel Air Hotel, or the Hotel Bel Air, in a suite overlooking the Swans it was a very small marriage, like 10 people, and a justice of the peace. But when I said I do, I was in all the way instantly. I mean, it's like, what have I been waiting for? I said I do, and it's like in that instant I had been married. I may as well have been married for 20 years. I was just there, and believing in it and committed to it. And I think we often talk on our anniversaries about how we feel about our 20 plus years together. And I always say to her, it's like it's yesterday and forever. It's like it just started and it's never not been. And so it's really good that way. I mean, look, we have our moments, no question. All couples have their moments, but overall, the moments have been really good for us.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, I mean, both of you, like I said, are so similar because you really have cemented your legacies in Hollywood, and that's a credit to both of you. And the other person I want to talk about, Dean, and she told me, she said to tell you, Gidget sends her love.
Oh, Karen.
She has become a great friend of mine, and
I love Karen.
She would get mad at me if I praised her because she doesn't like when people like make her the center of attention. But I'll just say this: she is everything you want a person to be because she is a tremendous friend. But talk about your time on Gidget, as Moondoggy and stuff, because I'll tell you, I still to this day could watch those episodes. I could laugh. It's hysterical, and it was just tremendous. And you two really, as well as the other cast, did a great job of making something that was a updated version of Gidget with different actors and making it very successful. So talk about that a little bit.
When I met Karen back when we were when they were casting the movie of the week, it was called Gidget Summer Reunion, and I met Karen in the final readings. I mean, look at that picture of her. I mean, she was incredible. I mean, diminutive, but it was so interesting. Karen was for this. She's doing this bubblegum thing with Gidget, but Karen's all woman. There is very much a woman there, and there is substance there. There's heart there. There's an enormous capacity to love and care about people there, And I knew when we read together for Columbia Pictures Television, I knew if we were fortunate, if I was fortunate enough to get this, we would do we would do well together. Because, and it was so interesting coming off of the contrasting with the Little House experience, where that had been such a chaste relationship and had to be done so carefully. Working with Karen, because I was working with a woman who was a contemporary, we could explore the dynamic of their relationship in a way that was never possible on Little House. And that made that really special for me. And Karen had this just, I mean, if you had any idea of the shooting schedules we had, if you've interviewed Karen, she's told you
Yeah.
about those shooting schedules. I mean, we were boarding 5 shows at a time,
Right.
shooting 5 episodes over a 2-week period, everything in the house, everything at the beach, everything outside the house. I mean, all these things that were done. It was just this schizophrenic experience to shoot the show. And Karen just had this way of putting one foot in front of the other and smiling and being perky and fun. And she just delivered. And it was silly. When the pilot was sort of a traditional rom-com. It was adult. I mean, it was a young thing, but it was more adult than the cartoon that the series became. And the reason the series became much younger than it was when we started with the pilot is because it was part of a first run syndication wheel of programming that would premiere during the week at night in prime access, 7:30, something like that. And it reran on Saturday mornings at 10 and on Sunday mornings. So it was maybe for kids getting ready to go to bed during the week, and adults watching it too, who were sort of intrigued with the idea that Gidget would have another run. But in the mornings on Saturdays, it was more kids than not, and the show had to reflect what that audience needed. So immediately, our niece Danny, played beautifully by Sydney Penny, who was flat out one of the most beautiful young girls that anyone had ever seen. There was never a bad picture of Sydney. She was incredible to photograph. I mean, every angle on her was amazing. And then, then her on-screen good friend, played by Lily Hayden, with the hats and all of that, who was just funny, and sweet. And and Murph the Surf, they really, they became the core of this. Karen and I were sort of wondering, like, what are we going to become in this, even though we're the stars of this? But it really became much more the kids show, but we had a lot of fun together. She was so great to work with, and I feel fortunate that we have remained good friends ever since that time. And she is one of my best, most long-standing friends, and I just love her. So
Yeah.
I'm glad you've spoken to her, because I agree with what you've said. I mean, she's awesome.
Yeah, she really is, and I'm telling you, she's not just a great actress. She really is, like I said, what you want a person to be in life. She really,
Yeah.
exemplifies all of that. But Dean, before we go, it's hard to just look at one thing, point one thing out, and say that's what you're most proud of. But what has been most rewarding about your career, if you had to pick one thing?
I think whether it be as an actor on the stage or in front of a camera or working as a producer, you know, sort of in charge of writing something and bringing it together. I think the thing that's the most happy thing about the career is the teams that I've been a part of. The talented people. And our jobs when we do these things, whatever the shows are, our jobs are to make something work. Our job is to come in and be a positive force to make something happen. It's true in our lives. I mean, here looking at Catherine and me there, it's true in our lives and it's true in our work. We have a responsibility to the people we work with. Now, I will tell you, Mike, I haven't always been a perfect player in that situation. I've gotten frustrated by things. I mean, we had a lot of frustrating moments on Gidget with the way it was written. At times, we really struggled with that. But in the end, working as a group, we all came together and we made it happen. And I think that's a critical thing in this work. And I think it's something that anybody who does this work understands this. No matter where they're working, you cannot do the things you're doing without people around you who are supporting that effort. And you're supporting their effort and they're supporting yours. And it is a team thing. And I think that's, being a part of good teams and supporting the efforts of others. I think that's been the most satisfying part of all this work. The outcomes are all different, but there is a process that you have to buy into in order to make it work. And I feel good that for the most part, I think I bought into that process and been happy about it. And I'm proud of that. I feel good about that.
Well, Dean, it was a real honor for me, and I really do appreciate you giving me a few minutes today. Like I said, first off, congratulations, because it's been an outstanding career. Also, congratulations on the book, because I just know it's going to be an awesome read, and I can't wait to see it. But more importantly than anything else, thank you for giving fans like myself so many great moments throughout your career that we could look back on and say, that was an awesome episode. That was a great moment in TV. So thank you for doing that. And I really do applaud you for that. And thank you again for giving me some time.
Mike, my pleasure. Thank you for having me. And thank you for your work on In the Spotlight, shining a light on the work that people do. I mean, that's clearly what you're about. And I appreciate that, and it's all become, it's all part of this larger team thing. We all play a part in all of this. So, thank you for what you do.
Well, thank you, Dean. I really appreciate that. And folks, I just want to say this as we wrap this up. Dean Butler's had a tremendous career, no doubt about it. And I know it looks so easy, it looks effortlessly, but he really had to work hard to get everything that he has today. And it's because he was willing to put in the work. He was willing to be committed for what he wanted to do. And he's never lost sight of that. But I will say this about Dean Butler, and I think this is something that you can look at him and you could strive to be. Remember one thing, even when times are tough, remember this: bad times don't last, but good people do. And Dean Butler's been around for a very long time. For In the Spotlight, I'm Mike Kenichi saying good night, everyone.